evening, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. 5 people have been killed and more than a dozen wounded in Russian strikes on a war-scared town in eastern Ukraine. The Boeing 737 crashing in China with 132 people on board. Video purportedly showing the final moments. The plane nosediving 21,000 feet in just over 1 minute. A search for answers. The Philippines and the United States will kick off the largest ever joint military drills in the archipelago nation next week. Tonight, 5 people have been killed, more than a dozen wounded in Russian strikes on a war-scared town in eastern Ukraine. Also, the strike of a shopping mall in Kiev, providing more evidence of Russia's assault on Ukraine's cities and its people. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry released this aerial footage of long-range, precision-guided weaponry destroying a store of multiple launch rocket systems and ammunition in a shopping center in Kiev that killed at least 8 people. But the Russian military accuses Ukraine of continuing to use civilian infrastructure as a shield for artillery and rocket systems used to attack Russian troops and using a square near the mall to store and reload ammunition for missile systems. And here's a video from the security camera reportedly showing the Retroville shopping mall in Kiev being hit by shelling. Take a look. Now, Russia's superior aerial reach striking dozens of buildings with devastating results. But it is the city of Mariupol that has become the symbol of this war. And rescue crews are picking through smoldering rubble as bodies lay on the ground after a deadly overnight Russian strike hit that shopping mall in northwestern Kiev. Neighbors in a housing block whose windows were shattered by the blast said they had seen the mobile rocket launcher near the mall for several days previously. Take a look.
З самого початку побачив дуже велике сяйво на всю кімнату. Це прямо напроти моєї кімнати було. Дуже потужний удар з приватським.
Ліміт на любов не вичерпаний. Ми кличемо, як і Давид, справедливе покарання.
6 bodies were laid out in front of the Retroville shopping mall in the northwest of Kiev, according to the journalists. The 10-story building was hit by a powerful blast that pulverized vehicles in its car park and left a crater several meters wide. The burnt-out mall was still smoking on Monday morning. All of its south side had been destroyed, as well as a fitness center in its car park. And they released this security camera footage showing the massive explosion and a mushroom cloud, followed by a series of smaller blasts. And Ukraine's leaders on Tuesday accused Russian forces of firing on unarmed protesters in the occupied southern city of Kherson, with videos appearing to show residents fleeing, flashbang grenades, and sustained gunfire. A series of videos posted on social media and the messaging app Telegram showed citizens gathering in Kherson's Freedom Square protesting against Russia's recent seizure of the city. Russian soldiers can be seen firing multiple volleys of gunfire into the air with no immediate evidence their rifles were trained directly at the civilians. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba posted a video of the incident on Twitter. In Kherson, he said Russian war criminals opened fire at unarmed people who peacefully protested against invaders. He said this is the ugly face of Russia, a disgrace to humankind. We must stop Russia, sanction them, isolate them, hold war criminals to account. Kherson, a city of almost 300,000 people before the war, was the first major Ukrainian city to fall to Russian forces, with Moscow capturing it within the first week of its invasion. Meanwhile, in Mykolaiv in Ukraine, almost half the women admitted since February 24 have had to give birth in the basement of a maternity hospital. Mykolaiv has been under attack for days. 7 women at the ward are scheduled to give birth soon in a city where war broke out without warning and in a country where several maternity hospitals have already been attacked since the Russian invasion began. Take a look.
Войны. Страшно, страшно за себя. Когда ты с семьей рядом, то страшно, но ты хоть рядом. А сейчас страшно вдвойне, потому что ты здесь, а семья ждет дома. Тоже, когда сирена работает, ты всегда держишь связь и здесь, и там. Поэтому тяжело.
Четыре, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Француженкам было очень тяжело понять. Снежана, Снежана, Светлана. Я говорю, что?
And the war in Ukraine has impacted the world's economies. Spain, for example, is battling its worst inflation in 30 years. And the price of goods, from fuel to essential supplies, has gone up. Our correspondent from Spain, Beverly Madrid, reports from Barcelona.
Thousands of demonstrators hit the streets across Spain on Saturday in protest at the soaring cost of food, light, and fuel, which have been exacerbated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The rallies took place in Spain's main cities. They were called by the far-right Vox Party, which sought to tap into growing social discontent over the spiraling cost of living that has left many families struggling to pay their bills.
Hemos venido a echarles, hemos venido a levantarnos, hemos venido a decirles que nunca más nos vamos a sentar, que no vamos a abandonar las calles hasta expulsar a este gobierno ilegítimo entregado a los enemigos de España del poder. Hemos venido a eso y conviene que lo sepan en la Moncloa, que conviene que los...
Es decir, nos suben la luz porque dice que es Putin. Mentira, esto venía ya de antes. Nos suben el gas porque dicen que también es Putin. Mentira, venía de antes. Es decir, todo es, desde que estamos en este gobierno y siempre que ha entrado la izquierda, siempre han sido sus derechos, no los de los trabajadores como tal. Cuando dicen que luchan por los nuestros, no es real, no es real.
Outside City Hall in Madrid, a crowd of several thousand people gathered, waving hundreds of Spanish flags and chanting angry slogans calling for the resignation of Socialist Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. Many said the government should be lowering taxes to help those struggling. On Monday, Spanish lorry drivers declared an open-ended strike over fuel prices. Government Minister Felix Bolaños pledged the government would unveil its planned steps to reduce the cost of energy and fuel on March 29. Sánchez is currently on a European tour to lobby for a common EU response to soaring energy prices. Madrid has for months urged its European partners to change the mechanism which couples electricity prices to the gas market. But its pleas have so far fallen on deaf ears. despite support from Paris. Reporting from Barcelona, Spain, I'm Beverly Madrid. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Beverly. 2 women died after being stabbed at a high school in southern Sweden. Let's listen in.
We were called to this school sometime after 5 o'clock this afternoon. We had a report of some sort of disturbance. There were loud voices heard in the school. And when our patrol cars were on the way to the school, we got more information that pointed to a serious crime being committed, that violence was occurring on the school. So the first police patrol on site entered the school and they could rather quickly arrest a suspect.
Local media said the alleged attacker called the emergency number to say where he was and that he had put down his weapon and admitted to having killed 2 people. He was armed with a knife and an axe, according to several Swedish media. The suspect was arrested without difficulty shortly after the arrival of the first patrol, according to a police account. After extensively inspecting the scene and interviewing witnesses, the authorities are convinced the suspect acted alone. No motive has been established so far. All classes scheduled for Tuesday had been canceled, and Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson said she had heard the news with sadness and dismay. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Tama na! Puro kay daldal! Sa dami ng problema ng mga syudad, panahon na para magbigay ng lunas!
Kailangan ng lunas sa problema ng no work, no pay. Lunas sa sweldo, sa kita, sa benepisyo. Kailangan nila ay party list sa Kongreso.
Ihanda mo ang puwersa ng Lunas Party List!
Lunas Party List, number 58 sa balota.
Wow, Mr. Bawal! Ang ganda naman itong bahay nyo! Ang ganda nitong TV! Magkano to? Biling ko na lang! Ang ganda nitong flower base! Magkano to? Biling ko na lang! Ang ganda nitong computer! Magkano to? Biling ko na lang! Hindi lahat na may presyuan at namamain. At kung boto mo ang pag-uusapan, bawal yan!
Ayon sa Omnibus Election Code, ang vote buying at vote selling para o laban sa isang kandidato ay isang election offense.
Pero kung desidido ka nang ibenta ang boto mo, i-online selling mo. Panigurado, maraming magmamind yan. Huwag mo kitulad sa'yo. Alam ko yung boto mo, bagsak presyo. Ako si Mr. Bawal na nagpapaalala sa inyo na ang pagbenta at pagbili ng boto, hoy! Bawal yan!
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
The search for answers after a Boeing 737 passenger jet suddenly went into nosedive and crashed into a mountain in China, currently killing everyone on board. The Boeing 737-800, just 6 years old, was 90 minutes into its flight from Kunming to the city of Guangzhou and cruising at 29,000 feet. And it suddenly went into a very steep nosedive in just over a minute before plunging into the rugged terrain in southern China on Monday afternoon. Chinese dash cams purports to show the flight's fatal plunge. The foreign ministry said Tuesday they believed all passengers on board were Chinese nationals. The disaster prompted an unusually swift public reaction from President Xi, who said he was shocked and called for absolute safety in air travel. Meanwhile, state media Vice Premier Liu He said a powerful official close to President Xi, who usually deals with economic matters, had been dispatched to the area to oversee the rescue and investigation work. Jean-Paul Troadec, former director of France's Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, said it was far too early to draw conclusions, but said the flight radar data pattern was very unusual. Chinese media reported that the airline will now ground all the 737-800 jets. Meanwhile, Norwegian energy giant Equinor said it briefly shut down production at its Snorre oil platform in the North Sea as a precautionary measure following an earthquake. The 4.6 magnitude quake occurred Monday at 6:32 a.m., according to the Norwegian National Seismic Network. The tremor could be felt on the platform, which produces between 30,000 and 35,000 barrels of oil per day, but no damage had been reported. Snorre is located in the Snorre oil field of west coast of Norway, and the oil from the platform is piped 45 kilometers Stratfjord B for export and storage. Norway is the largest producer of oil in Western Europe, but supplies only about 2% of global oil consumption, according to the Norwegian Petroleum. Meanwhile, Japan's government warned on Tuesday of possible widespread electricity outages for Tokyo and its surrounding regions as power plants hit by last week's powerful earthquake struggled to meet surging demand caused by a cold snap. The industry ministry called on people to conserve energy throughout Tuesday, but with sporadic snowfall and unseasonably cold temperatures in the capital, demand remains strong. We're only achieving power saving of around 1.5 million kilowatts, which is 2 to 3.5 million kilowatts less than the target level, warned Koichi Hagiuda, Japan's Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry. If this continues, he said, we are unfortunately approaching a situation where we will have to carry out widespread power cuts as we did on the day of the earthquake in order to prevent a total blackout. The current supply shortages have been caused in part by a powerful 7.4 magnitude earthquake off northeast Japan last week that killed at least 2 people and damaged several thermal power plants. An industry ministry official said operations at 6 plants are currently suspended because of damage to boilers, transformers, and turbines, while some are expected to resume operation by the end of March. For others, the repairs could take several months. Secretary General Antonio Guterres delivered his keynote speech to the Economist Sustainability Summit. His speech focused on keeping 1.5 alive, delivering on the fate of our planet, and he implored to world leaders to act with more urgency to cut the greenhouse gas pollution fueling climate change. Take a look.
There is no kind way to put it. The 1.5-degree goal is on life support. It is in intensive care. The science is clear. So is the math. Keeping 1.5 alive requires a 45% reduction in global emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by mid-century. That problem was not solved in Glasgow. In fact, the problem is getting worse. On the public finance side, wealthier countries must finally make good on the 100 billion climate finance commitment in 2022 to developing countries. International financial institutions must give greater priority to climate action. On blended finance, those institutions must partner with private finance for joint investments or give guarantees that will attract much greater volumes of private investment. More creative risk-taking and innovation is needed to unlock the trillions the transition desperately needs. On the private side, we need to see far more investment in the net zero and climate-resilient transition of emerging economies. It is the right thing to do and the profitable thing to do. So how do we keep 1.5 alive? By accelerating the phase-out of coal and all fossil fuels and implementing a rapid, just and sustainable energy transition, the only true pathway to energy security. by honoring the Glasgow Pledge to strengthen national climate plans every year until they are aligned with 1.5 degrees, by delivering concrete outcomes this year on climate coalitions to help emerging economies urgently phase out coal, by driving a swift and transformative increase in climate finance with multilateral development banks leading on unlocking the trillions that we know are needed, by speeding up the decarbonization of major sectors such as shipping, aviation, steel and cement, and by protecting the most vulnerable and ensuring an equal focus on adaptation. That's how we will move the 1.5-degree goal from life support to the recovery room.
In pandemic news here in the country, the Department of Health said all regions in the Philippines remain at minimal risk case classification with health systems capacity at low risk. Let's listen in.
Patuloy po ang dating ng magagandang balita dahil pababa na po ng pababa ang mga kaso ng COVID-19 sa lahat ng lugar sa ating bansa. Dahil dito, lahat po ng rehiyon natin ay nananatiling nasa minimal risk case classification at may low risk health systems capacity. Average daily cases nitong nakaraang linggo ay 13% na mas bababa kumpara noong isang linggo.
And despite a decline in the number of new COVID cases and hospitalizations in the country, President Duterte said he is not ready to lift the face mask requirement just yet. In a pre-recorded public address aired this morning, the president said he's not keen on relaxing face mask protocol yet because this reduces the chance of spreading COVID. Let's listen in.
You know, itong mask na maraming nagtatanong. Alam mo, I am not ready to order the removal of the mask. Pero siguro yung plastic na cover, pwede na yun. Pero I said it has done a lot of good. Prevented the contamination from spreading. So, matagal pa ito. And there are reports that said that I don't know if it's subject to confirmation na may bagong COVID found in Israel. So, whether we like it or not, kung totoo yan, it will reach again the shores of our country.
Meanwhile, the Philippines and the United States will kick off the largest ever joint military drills in the archipelago nation next week, according to U.S. officials today, showing off their strong defense ties in the face of growing Chinese assertiveness. Nearly 9,000 Filipino and American soldiers will take part in the 12-day war games on the main island of Luzon, which are usually an annual affair, but were canceled or curbed during the pandemic. The U.S. Embassy said in a statement that the exercises, which will start on March 28, will cover, among other things, maritime security, live fire training, counterterrorism, and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And we'll be back with the war in Ukraine right after this break.
Paano makakaboto yun? May kapansanan nga.
Paano naman sa mga no read, no write? Hindi pa rin pwedeng bumoto.
Pwedeng bumoto! Ang mga illiterate o ang mga hindi marunong magbasa o magsulat, maging ang mga PWD, may karapatan silang bumoto.
Paano?
Maaaring magdala ng mga kasama ang mga illiterate at PWD para maalalayan sila sa kanilang pagboto o sa mga pagkakataong kailangan nila ng tulong.
Kahit sino, pwede nilang isama?
No, dapat kamag-anak na kadugo ng botante ang kasama nila. Magdala lamang sila ng PWD ID. Ano bang kapansanan ng kakilala mo?
Ayun, nakahiga lang eh. Hindi makabangon. May sakit daw siyang love nut.
Hindi kapansanan yun. Alam ko na. Eto sa Balutamol, Balutromycin. Pakainin nyo. para ganahan. Para sa karagdagang kaalaman, makipag-ugnayan lang sa pinakamalapit na barangay o bisitahin ang COMELEC website.
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
Let's return to the war in Ukraine and the efforts to bring the two sides together. Almost a month since the Russia-Ukraine conflict began, hopes are fading of a possible meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky had warned without talks, Europe could descend into World War III. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky renewed an offer of direct peace talks with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin late Monday, declaring the status of disputed territories could be up for debate and a possible referendum. Zelensky told local media that he was ready to meet Putin in any format to discuss ending the almost one-month-old war that has shattered several Ukrainian cities. Russia has declared Crimea part of Russia and recognized the independence of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine. Nearly a month into the conflict, there has been little progress in talks between the two sides, and Zelensky has repeatedly urged direct discussions with his Russian counterpart. Away from the front lines, diplomatic maneuvering will continue this week, with President Biden flying to Europe for talks with G7, EU, and NATO leaders. Moscow has warned relations with Washington are on the verge of rupture after Biden branded Putin a war criminal. It also said it was abandoning talks with Japan aimed at reaching a post-World War II peace treaty, citing Tokyo's openly hostile position against Russia. And today, the U.S. formally declared that the military in Myanmar committed genocide, mass atrocity against the Rohingya population in that country. Here's U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Beyond the Holocaust, the United States has concluded that genocide was committed 7 times. Today marks the 8th, as I have determined that members of the Burmese military committed genocide and crimes against humanity against Rohingya. The attack against Rohingya was widespread and systematic, which is crucial for reaching a determination of crimes against humanity. The evidence also points to a clear intent behind these mass atrocities, the intent to destroy Rohingya in whole or in part. Intent is evident in the military's efforts to prevent Rohingya from escaping, like soldiers blocking exits to villages before they began their attacks, sinking boats full of men, women, and children as they tried to flee to Bangladesh. This demonstrates the military's intent went beyond ethnic cleansing to the actual destruction of Rohingya. Among the most compelling material for reaching this decision was a 2018 report prepared by experts from the State Department, which focused on 2 periods of violence in Burma's Rakhine State, starting in October 2016 and August 2017, respectively. In both instances, the military used similar tactics targeting Rohingya: the razing of villages, killing, rape, torture, and other horrific abuses. The military's attacks in 2016 forced nearly 100,000 Rohingya to flee to Bangladesh. In 2017, attacks killed more than 9,000 Rohingya and forced more than 740,000 to seek refuge in Bangladesh. But let me close by saying something about the path out of genocide. Today's determination is one step on that path, as it tells Rohingya, and victims in particular, that the United States government recognizes the gravity of the atrocities committed against them.
And finally in our news is the Rainbow River fake or real news. Every week, middle school students in the suburbs of Paris present their arguments on the credibility of a dozen articles during a media information education class. Take a look.
Maintenant, je me dis que voilà, si je vois un site par exemple sur internet, et faut que je vérifie que c'est vrai avant, par exemple, de liker le commentaire et de le partager.
Pour décrypter une fake news, parce qu'avant je voyais quelque chose, je me disais bon d'accord c'est bien. Maintenant je vais plus en profondeur quand je vois une info.
Ils prennent un peu pour argent comptant ce qu'ils trouvent sans réfléchir, sans se demander quel impact ça va avoir. Ils vont être dans le sensationnel, l'émotionnel tout le temps et le partage pour avoir le plus grand nombre de likes, de clics.
As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in interesting times. Good night.